Good evening and welcome to it. It is exclusive interviews right here on ZTN Prime. Now, what we do here is we exclusively get to know our guests. Now, this evening we are getting into hip-hop and we're going to be talking to the trailblazing African hip-hop pioneer, and his name is Dumi. Right. Welcome to exclusive interviews.
Thank you. Glad to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor. So thanks for having me on the show.
It's rivetingly nice to speak to you today because we're going to go back into the 90s and we're going to be talking about hip-hop then and hip-hop now as well. So maybe you could just fill us in on how it started back then and if the sound was a lot different to what we have now. How accepted was it? Did people get within the field back then in the 90s as opposed to now?
Yeah, so how it all started, I'll even go a couple years before that. So I was in high school in Harare, and hearing hip-hop as it was growing and expanding at that time, coming across the oceans through friends overseas in the UK or in the US, letting us hear the sounds, and kind of decided that, hey, we want to be a part of that and we want to share our voice and perspective. At the time, in the kind of prevailing circles, there was a lot of talk about back to Africa and celebrating Afrocentricity from rappers in the US. And so for us, it was poignant to be like, hey, that's our time, we're kind of in the spotlight and at the forefront of what was happening. And so we're like, hey, we want to share our voices and our story. There's a really influential song we heard by a group called Stetsasonic that was called Africa, and they said Africa, Angola, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and we're like,
happy you mentioned that.
Yes, exactly. And so I would say, just in terms of styles and how it was, I don't want to say consciousness was more prevalent, but that was kind of the predominant subgenre within hip-hop at the time, which was good, and that's kind of what influenced us coming up.
I did get a feel of your music, very thought-provoking as well, but maybe you could fill us in on how we got to have the group Zimbabwe Legit, how that was formed, if it's still in existence now, and the contribution you're putting into hip-hop right now.
Okay. Yeah, no, so after, being inspired and thinking about coming out with our own music, we were contacting, we tried actually through, local outlets to try to make a move and make a push. I think it was early for a lot of them, and so the answer, we got a lot of pushback. We're like, we don't know if this music will sell or if it'll make a movement. But we did luckily get in contact with some folks in the music industry in the States, and they were blown away because they're like, oh my God, there's people in Africa rapping. And then we sent them the music, and they were like, oh, we thought at first it was kind of cute and kind of interesting, but we didn't know it was actually like really good. So they're like, yeah, if you guys ever come to the US, like, let's link up. Fast forward to a couple years later, we did go to the US to pursue multiple ventures and endeavors, and ended up meeting with these execs. At the time, we were coming from the motherland, so we were calling ourselves the Brothers from the Mother.
Oh, the Brothers from the Mother,
yeah.
Okay.
And they were like, yeah, that's a cool name, it's catchy. Creative. They were like, but it also sounds like you could be from Brooklyn, you could be from Harlem, because it's just brothers. They're like, but you're from Zimbabwe. They're like, you should represent that. And so it was like, we're tossing around ideas for names, and it was like Zimbabwe Legit. They're like, that's it. Because obviously Legit was kind of like the in slang at the time, too legit to quit.
I know.
Are you legit official?
Yes,
So since we came out then, it was kind of like, this is it. We were totally new to the industry side, right? We'd been performing for years, even been dancers and performed in competitions and shows, but that's essentially how Zimbabwe Legit came to be. The label loved it. People in the music biz, I remember meeting Busta Rhymes for the first time when he was still part of Leaders New School, and he was he's like, oh, my brother from Africa. And he wouldn't even let our hand go. He just kept shaking over and over like, oh man, good to meet you guys. There was a lot of interest and excitement in what we were doing, because it was also very different to have some authentic brothers from Africa telling our story and our perspective and sharing that. And we also infused traditional African and Zimbabwean sounds into the music. We had mbira in some of the songs, the traditional drumming and different things like that, as well as the perspective.
I was going to get into that. At that time, I don't think hip hop here was as expressive, right? American hip hop is very expressive. You have them airing their political views, and were you that free to put in your views of Zimbabwe into your music and have them expressed in songs? And I asked that because at that time, I think for years here, we did not have music that would express especially political views or maybe just social or economical views into their songs.
Yeah, I think definitely kind of socio-economic and historical.
Yeah.
I think we viewed ourselves really as historians because a lot of times, and also just documentarians of what it was like. Because on a basic level, a lot of people didn't even know, like, what was it like living in Africa? You know, is it other cities? Do you know, is it road? You know, some people just have very limited. I think now it's a lot simpler because you can just Google and be like, what does downtown Harare look like, and get a picture. But so a lot of that was, I think, education. I mean, I'll be honest and say we had like a chip. I had a chip on my shoulder, like, yo, I'm gonna let you know that Africa is actually a prosperous entity, and you know, and there's cities and there's culture, and you know, people are doing things, and it's vibrant.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, and so that was a lot of what we were trying to do. Like, hey, the perspective you might have had from watching Tarzan is all wrong. That's not even it.
That's not. You don't live in a jungle.
Exactly.
You filled us in on what it was like taking Africa to overseas, right? But here, as Africans and Zimbabweans, at that time were they gripping what you were trying to do? Did you get enough support here in Zimbabwe? Or were you just received as, you know, the Africans that went abroad and trying to bring back a different culture that we didn't have here?
So it's interesting, like, there's some challenges with, you know, record company and industry, and like us trying to be like, hey, let's release the record here, and they're like, well, we don't have any distribution partners here, and so on, and that kind of thing. And especially, like I said, the industry structure, I don't know if at that time people here were seeing that opportunity to be like, hey, let's bring this record here and put it in the stores and promote it. But the people, the audience, the fans, the youth, even now, I was just at a festival performing just some days ago, and I was running into people that are like, yo, if you knew the impact your music had on me when you guys came out.
That's
I got a WhatsApp voice message from a DJ who was saying, yo, you know, when you guys came out and were in America doing it, I realized, hey, people from artists from Zim can make it anywhere because you guys were doing it at a high level. I mean, we were in like Billboard magazine and The Source and different magazines and publications, and you know, traveling to like Japan to perform and so on. And so I think it, you know, in retrospect for us, you know, while you're doing it, you don't necessarily know. But in retrospect, it's like, yeah, it was inspirational for a lot of people.
I guess, you know, when you get into something, what you do it for is so that, you know, it helps other people. It is inspirational and people remember it, and that all makes sense. Speaking here to Dumi, right, and he is an African hip-hop pioneer. Getting in touch with all of that. Please do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back to it. It is exclusive interviews right here on ZTN Prime. Getting into hip-hop culture is what we're doing now, and we're speaking to Dumi, right? And let's talk about relevance, right? It changes over seasons, I think, in every different working space, right? How has it been like for you to move decades in and staying relevant to today's hip-hop as opposed to then, and also having a lot more characters involved in the culture right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question and perspective, and I think that's the challenge as an artist. Like, how do you navigate over time and not lose your focus? For me, it's staying active as a practitioner. You know, like I think one of the quotes that I give to people when I do speaking workshops or just interacting in general is, never let your past be brighter than your future. So don't kind of rest on your laurels and think about what you did in the past and how great it was. Always think, what can you do next to innovate for the future? And so for me, just staying steeped in the culture, you know, building with even younger generations and upcoming, and kind of seeing how they feel and what they like and what they don't like. something that's surprising as well. Like, I do workshops in schools and colleges and stuff, and I was with sixth graders, and people were like, "Oh yeah, the youth, they only like this. Yeah, they don't really want any like knowledge or whatever and stuff. Yeah, they just want." But then they were like, "Yo, can you do a rap? Can you rap for us?" And then I just one of my verses, regular verses, and they were like, "Oh, bars! Oh, did you hear that punchline?" They got really excited, and you realize they react to good music and good lyrics. They kind of just tend to hear the bubblegum stuff, and so people think that that's what's prevalent. But I think just staying active as a practitioner, I think the same would apply if you were like a physician, right? If you never do surgeries, you'll lose your touch. You'll lose your precision, and so just staying that way, and then also doing things to expose yourself to different facets, different styles, and being open to hear it. It might not be your cup of tea, but at least you hear it and understand, okay, I can see why people like music from that region or this style.
Let's talk about creative freedom when it comes to actually writing your lyrics or putting together an album. I've come to believe that putting together an album is like putting together a story or a book. It's got to make sense altogether. Now, how do you sit down as an artist? What inspires you to write songs? How do you gather enough content for an album or for a song, enough to deliver a certain message moving with that program at that time?
Yeah, for me, I think I start with kind of like an overarching theme. So like kind of what's the music, what's the album, the record about? Or kind of how am I feeling at a certain time? Like, what do I want to share? I think that's kind of the key thing. Like, what do I want to tell people? Like, I might be feeling sad, but maybe I don't want to tell folks that, right? Like, what am I trying to communicate? And then once I have an overarching theme, I want to find different pieces of the puzzle that fit with that, right? I don't want every song to be melancholy and, oh, times are so hard and I'm struggling. I think a lot of times you end up one-dimensional when you do that. But it's all the facets. It's like, what's the joy? What's the pain? What's the struggle? What's the success? What's the future vision? And so kind of putting together different chapters, if you will. And so as I fill in the chapter, and then maybe I say, you know what? I think I've got the sadness covered. Don't need no more sad songs. I was watching a Bob Marley movie, documentary, whatever.
The biopic.
Yeah, the biopic. And his wife, she was like, Rita was like, why are all the songs so sad? Don't you ever find love? So I always want to include stuff like that, like, hey, because emotions, humans, we're multifaceted, and so you want to touch different aspects. And so I also try to like put together, as I'm building the songs, I play them together and see if they fit, and then and figure out what's missing, and be like, oh, I haven't really talked about this area or this focus, or
let's talk about the difference between handling your career as a group. From Zimbabwe Legit, and then moving to having your solo career and having people receive you as Dumi as opposed to a whole group. Which one do you actually prefer?
I think there's positives on each side. I will say, as a soloist, you talk about like creative freedom and the creative process. It's freer because if you decide to do something, you do it. So in a group, you kind of run it by the other person, and sometimes you got a great idea and they're not feeling it. And then so you don't want to be a jerk, right? So you kind of negotiate and be like, no, I'm really, and try to convince them. Whereas when you're a soloist, it's like, hey, this I want to do, I'm going to do it. And I do it. And if somebody else is like, I don't think it's a good idea, you'd be like, yeah, you know what? I do, so I'm going to do it anyway. And I think that's why a lot of groups break up. If you've never been in a group, people don't realize, like, sometimes your philosophies, and I'm not saying this specifically to my group, but as groups, like, your philosophies change over time. And so you might be like, I don't really want to do this kind of song, and your partner does it. A great example of that is Outkast, right? They're in totally different spaces, mentally, spiritually, and so they found it challenging to make music, even though us as fans, I would love to hear another Outkast record because it's so good.
You could almost hear it with Outkast. You could almost feel it that they were not aligned and they didn't gel much. Speaking of trying to put together a whole look for us, the people, sometimes we can't pick out what Dumi is about. what would you say to someone who's getting into the hip hop space or trying to start off their music career? Would you suggest they join a group first so that they become palatable, and then after that they then try and introduce themselves, or would you just advise they head in like that?
I think the tricky thing with that is it's super individual. Like it kind of depends who you have around you. I would say being in a group is a good experience, but you have to have good people around you. And so I wouldn't force it. Like if there's not people that you like to collaborate with or enjoy working with, or even have the same kind of style and work ethic, professionalism is a big thing with groups. You got 7 people in the group. Is everyone going to show up on time? Is everyone going to be professional? Is everyone going to do the task? And so on. And so it can be challenging. I think collaborating, even if you're not in a group, is good though as an artist, because I think it teaches you things. I've been in the studio with people working on features, either me doing a feature or them doing a feature, and seeing how they move, how they record, what they do vocally, and it's a learning experience where if I hadn't had that experience, I'd have never learned that.
Lovely. We're going to be getting into your features and also talking about you having toured USA, Europe, and Africa, and how that influenced your music. When we do come back, it is exclusive interviews. Please do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back to it. It is exclusive interviews right here on ZTN Prime. Speaking to Dumi, right, and we are getting, involved in hip hop exclusively, how we put it all together, especially when we bring out the music. Let's talk about influence. You've traveled United States, Europe, Africa. How has that influenced your music? Of course, you pick up hip hop from, let's say, Nigeria, and then maybe let's take to Compton, and then back to Harare, and you've got to put all of that into the culture. How has that been like for you?
I think eye-opening, and I think also it kind of gives you a nice kind of gauge and read on how your music resonates or what hits. Like I remember when one of the first tours we did when we went to Japan, and I was just learning and growing. There was a more experienced group that we were on tour with, Organized Confusion, that was on the label. Real, dope and super expertise. But we go to radio stations or go to do media and stuff, do TV, and just seeing how they operated was kind of influential. But then performing for the crowd and kind of seeing how do they react to this song, what things get them hyped.
How was that like?
Yeah, it was like super wild because, like I said, we'd performed before, but this was like a professional label managed thing, and I know they had just such a passion for the music. I feel like over there, even one of the DJs was telling us, is they study it. It's not just entertainment. They study. They know the artists and the lyrics and the, and all of this stuff. And so it was cool. And we'd go out to different places, and would gather a bunch of people gather around for pictures or whatever. And then we'd cipher with them, and then seeing people rap in Japanese was kind of wild. And I think also kind of reinforcing that thing of hey, make sure you put your individuality in your music. And then you perform and you kind of see which songs that you do are universal, that even though you're in a different country or different city, people still respond to it. And then other things, maybe where it's more introspective, you need an audience that can actually sit and take it in. So other things you can do in the song to kind of explain or talk about it before you perform it and stuff. So I think it was good training ground to kind of
I don't know if we ever get to a point where we can solidly stand, on 2 feet and say we've got enough training, especially if you're in the media industry. So moving on to you speaking at Catapult Future Fest in Norway. Now, how are you using all your experience to talk about global challenges, when it comes to music, and maybe just the innovation, seeing that it's a different place as well?
Yeah, so that was interesting because it's a conference for investors and founders of entrepreneurs of startups. And my perspective or the viewpoint that I was bringing was, well, how do you message? How do you communicate a value proposition? How do you communicate what you're trying to overcome to somebody who's interested in what you do? They were saying, some people are great entrepreneurs but don't necessarily articulated in a way that's palatable or easy to remember. And so I was using the music as a background for that. So it's a little daunting going in because I'm looking like, hey, I'm the hip hop artist. These cats are not rappers, but how does what I do translate into what they're doing? And I think going in, I was just relying on like, hey, what have I done that has had impact, and how can I kind of translate it for these folks that makes it applicable for them, right? They're not going to all start spitting bars, but what can I tell them about what I've done? Like, how do you engage people? How do you captivate? I have acronyms that are part of my presentation that say, like, okay, you need to tell a story.
Yeah.
You need something that's intriguing. You need something unique. And so infusing that in kind of the presentation. And then the reception was great. Like, I had them jumping and bouncing like we were at a rap show, but they were still getting the information and understanding what we were trying to present, which was cool.
You use the word infuse. Now, I'm curious to know, how do you infuse that hip-hop culture that almost comes with not very much academic relatability? And then I'm reliably informed that you also lectured at Virginia Tech, for an example. How are you merging the two, especially putting hip-hop and lyrical content into an academic space? That's a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's actually a growing sector of hip-hop in the States is hip-hop academia and hip-hop in schools, hip-hop in colleges, hip-hop in universities, where it's part of the curriculum, and it's kind of like sociology and social studies, like, because it's a movement, right? Like, hip-hop has been used for political purposes in countries and for messaging. Hip-hop has been used to kind of socially uplift people. Hip-hop has been used as an economic engine, right, for people who don't have much, to use their voice to gain, employment. It's build a whole billion-dollar industry globally, and so studying that is important. And I think initially it wasn't studied; it was kind of informal education, and now these institutions are realizing, like, hey, we need, Harvard got Nas because they're like, we need these lyrical giants to come in and kind of break down how, without formal training for a lot of them, how they were able to do this and build empires and industries and companies and get followings and notoriety, because that's what all these organizations are trying to do, right? And it's like, these rap artists are doing it and have done it. Sometimes they've even been exploited for it, where you've got big fashion houses, the clothes that they model and style are all influenced by hip hop. So there's a lot of study of that. And so I always tell people I'm just as comfortable in the streets at a nightclub, as, at a podium in a school, talking about it from an academic standpoint and like historically documenting what happened, because I think that's also important for people to understand, like, this is how things started, this is how things changed, this is how things are, this is what the landscape looks like.
It's interesting. I'd never put myself in the portfolio to think about it like that, but then we have got the examples of Fela Kuti. I don't know if you know him from Nigeria.
Oh yeah,
he's also had
big
influence, especially into the academia space. I didn't think about that as well, but it's a good thing to share. I think we do need to incorporate a lot of I don't know how to merge the two, especially when it comes to Africa, but we need to get to that point. Now, before we let you go, we've got to ask, if one day, when the day comes, because it will come, that we have to speak about you, what do you hope that we say about your influence, and also about the music and your role in the hip-hop, and the African hip-hop?
Yeah. I hope people say the music was good.
Number one,
and that it moved people, and that I said something, talk about Fela Kuti, talk about Hugh Masekela, talk about Miriam Makeba, like, all people that influenced me, or people that said something and that moved the social structure through their music, even if it was through entertainment or through joy or through information. And then I'd also want to say, and this is super important for me, that I gave back. And I reached back and helped folks the way people have helped me. A lot of the other hip-hop icons that I've collaborated with and worked with it's through their generosity and benevolence and guidance that I've been able to be successful. So hopefully there'll be people that'll say, like, yeah, that Dumi, right? Yeah, he helped me out, when I was coming up, and allow me to make moves and be successful.
They do say that memories live longer than people do. So especially if you hit someone in the memory, they always remember. How do we catch up with you?
I'm on all social media platforms under Dumi Right, so DUMI-RIGHT. I always tell people, do me right, don't do me wrong. Do me right on whether you're Instagram, whether you're Facebook, whether you're Twitter, YouTube, you can find me. And then I also have my own website, dumiright.com.
I love that. Thank you so much. Hope to see and hear more of your work as we move toward, a bigger hip-hop space.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
It's been absolutely lovely, and I do hope that it was edifying for you as well to pick up a couple of nuggets from Dumi Right. You do know where to catch up with him. Until next time, my name is Erica Ndoro. Please have a good one.